The struggle against fascism. Today, I want to contribute to our ongoing discussions about Clara Zetkin's The Struggle Against Fascism and contemporary accounts of fascism's rise in Europe, particularly the socioeconomic context that enabled it. I'll examine Zetkin's essay section by section, highlighting similarities and differences between her era and ours with the aim of identifying where we should focus our collective efforts to prevent history from repeating itself. We must recognize that no one is coming to save us. We must save ourselves. Fortunately, the Marxist tradition provides us with the tools to understand the factors driving this crisis and a roadmap for liberating the proletariat from the tyranny of capitalism. I want to acknowledge that I owe a debt of gratitude to the articles and discussions you all shared with me from this group and the broader Marxist community who are untangling the briar patch of Trumpism and sorting out what could be the seeds of fascism from what's simply grift or vengeance or whatever else. This is my attempt as a working class dissident, reckoning with those ideas, processing the works already produced by this group and others, and attempting to create some value to deepen our collective understanding. You all have given so much to me as I've been navigating the current crisis personally, and I can only hope I can add something to the discussion, even if that's only creating something for you to disagree with to further develop your own analysis by and by me. Today's centrists. Today, leftists endure the flagellation of centrists claiming that we caused this current calamity by being petulant children unwilling to compromise with evil. We are told that by refusing to loosen our grip on our marginalized comrades that are being dragged perilously over the precipice of renewed authoritarianism that we caused this. By refusing to accept our present and future economic security being mortgaged to fund a pogrom against the Palestinians, we've been positioned as the stumbling block to a free and democratic society. We see through these lies, as Zetkin did, knowing that sacrificing one marginalized group upon the pyre of centrism only weakens our collective defenses against the insatiable organ of state-sponsored hate. As she put it, we have no illusions that we can overcome direct violence through an appeal to democracy. The social democratic views of fascism. We speak often of a pendulum in political science. It ascribes a Newtonian character to the reactionary changes in political ideology over time. In this first section, Zetkin discusses the reformists, attributing the rise of fascism in the West to the Bolsheviks, for instance, and for having the audacity to take what was rightfully theirs rather than remain prostrate before the Tsar. But an abstract concept like fascism is not simple. The term doesn't name a concept that exists independent of the conditions that created it, but it is used to produce knowledge that drives our understanding of a complex structure. Instead of reducing concrete reality to a simple category, we have to take this abstraction and add back to it all the complex factors that produced it. We can't reduce this down to two-dimensional geometry of a pendulum like our critics would prefer. Zetkin begins this section with a stinging reproach of reformism by making this modest proposal to highlight the absurdity of the situation communists faced during this era. So there's nothing left for the proletarian but to step aside quietly and modestly and not provoke the tigers and lions of bourgeois class rule through a struggle for its liberation and its own rule, and patiently wait to see whether a tiny bit can be gained through this route for democracy and reform. Then, as now, we must first overcome the gravity of the centrists acting as de facto state apologists, preventing us from advocating for ourselves against the rise of authoritarianism. Reformists use their privileged status to amplify their message, sometimes literally drowning out the proletariat with their loudspeakers. Using their polished political machine to seize whatever platform that may be available and dole it out to those they deem worthy of sharing it. Globalize the Intifada? I like the energy. Let's workshop that one a little. It may not fit with the optics. That cop has a rainbow baton. I think this pepper spray is organic. Not rousing the paper lions of bourgeois class rule is especially challenging when we march among them. What we talk about when we discuss fascism from a Marxist perspective. Break it down into 10 points. Fascism's emergence is inextricably tied to the economic crisis of capitalism and the decline of its institutions. The rise of fascism is based on the proletariat's failure to resolve capitalism's social crisis by taking power and beginning to reorganize society. 3. Fascism possesses a mass character with a special appeal to petty bourgeois layers threatened by the decline of the capitalist order. 4. To win support from these layers, fascism makes use of anti-capitalist demagogy. 5. Fascist ideology elevates nation and state above all class contradictions and class interests. 6. The ideology of national chauvinism is used by fascist leaders as a cover to incite militarism and imperialist war. 7. A major characteristic of fascism is the use of organized violence by anti-working class shock troops, aiming to crush all independent proletarian activity. 8. The ideology of racism and racist scapegoating is central to fascism's message. 9. At a certain point, important sections of the capitalist class began to support and finance the fascist movement, seeing it as a way to counter the threat of proletarian revolution. 10. Once in power, fascism tends to become bureaucratized and moves away from its earlier demagogic appeals, leading to a resurgence of class contradictions and class struggle. Trotsky held similar ideas to Zetkin, and their position is a little more streamlined, having benefited from building upon her work. We'll revisit this in lecture as it serves as a perfect tool for recapping and discuss the discussion and refocusing as we dive into our current situation. So what do we mean specifically when we talk about fascism? Fascism is a specific variant of Bonapartism. We'll get to that in a minute too. First, here are some concrete examples so we have a common frame of reference for the ensuing discussion. Um, the classical examples, Mussolini's Italy, Nazi Germany, imperialist Japan, Franco's Spain, not as much. The puppet states of the Iron Garden, Eustache. Uh, then Salazar's Portugal doesn't really fit. Perón's Argentina doesn't really fit. But um, so Mussolini regime um, from 1922 to 1943, characterized by ultranationalism, authoritarianism, militarism, and anti-communism. So, to what degree did fascism, as a definition of Mussolini's regime, fit? It's a perfect fit. It was the prototype. Hitler regime, um, y'all have had this drilled into your heads, so we're not going to go into too deeply. I think the other stuff is more interesting. So in Nazi Germany, they used the essay to crush communists and consolidated big business power. Um, and of course, the ethnic cleansing and genocide. But the racial obsession was core to to Hitler's regime. It wasn't just an afterthought, and it was industrialized. It was like a factory operation. So there were several puppet regimes also under the control of Mussolini and of Hitler. So Albania, Montenegro, Greece is kind of its own thing. It was actually with the Allied powers, but had a lot of the same cultural elements of other fascist regimes. Uh, Vichy France, the independent state of Croatia, Slovak Republic, Norway, Hungary, Serbia. To varying degrees, they all fit this the fascist model, but there a lot of them have other factors that aren't common to the Hitler regime or Mussolini regime. I like this cartoon a lot. It's his daddy Hitler teaching Quisling from Norway how to stand on his own 2 feet, kind of biting sarcasm. Um, Vichy France is its own thing. It's interesting to get into, but I think it carries us too far into Vietnam, and Vietnam gets us into the Eastern Theater and all that. So to keep it simple, I'm just kind of skimming over that as well. But Fascism isn't just a dictatorship, it's a specific counter-revolutionary tool of capitalism in crisis. Modern far-right movements, Trumpism, Modi's regime, might borrow fascist tactics, but often lack the mass petit bourgeois insurgency that Zetkin and Trotsky emphasized. Um, in the interest of time, too, I'm going to skip over um, a lot of this, but this was the regime in Croatia, some of the propaganda from the era. In the Jasenovac concentration camp, as many as like 100,000 um, killed. You can still actually go visit in Croatia if you want to. The Iron Guard, Romania, are notorious. This was the paramilitary shock troop, fascist group within Romania. Luckily, we don't have anything like that in the West. So Zekin manages to precisely dissect the differences between authoritarianism and right-wing populism from true fascism in such a way as we can apply her methodology unaltered to our own situation. With her characterization of the regime of Miklos Horthy in Hungary, it's impossible not to see the striking similarities between the Horthy regime and that current leader of Hungary, Viktor Orban. One could draw many parallels between the Horthy and Orban regimes, strongly nationalist politics, even specifically their insistence upon evoking mythologized glory days of the empire with the Treaty of Trianon. Orban is especially intent on revisiting this old wound and uses it for a rallying point to consolidate national pride among his adherents. Both take on a distinctly xenophobic stance. Horthy with the Jews and Orban with the Muslims. Um, Both are very vocally Christian, which dovetails nicely with their anti-communist rhetoric. Both figures have touted expansionist foreign policy goals and prioritized consolidating state power and quashing dissent. Um, Horthy regime um, fits well along the pattern of fascism we've established already. Ultranationalism, territorial revanchism it was a new term for me. It's a policy seeking to retaliate, especially to recover lost territory. Hungary lost like 72% of its territory after this treaty at the end of World War One, which has been a deep wound still for the country. But their policies of against Jews, Romani, and minority people, and ethnic supremacy are still a central goal. Um, the repression of leftists and liberals, authoritarian one-party tendencies, anti-Semitism, collaboration with the Holocaust. Under Nazi pressure, Horthy's government facilitated the deportation of 437,000 Jews to Auschwitz. Um, the Arrow-Cross Party is a Hungarian Nazi-style fascist party that was heavily aligned with the Nazis. And paramilitary violence definitely happened. The White Terror from 1919 to 1921 saw far-right militias murder communists and Jews. Um, you notice the fascist-style propaganda glorifying militarism and national purity. Um, but they didn't really have totalitarian control, unlike Hitler and Mussolini. Horthy shared power with aristocrats, the military, and conservative elites, rather than establishing a one-party dictatorship. There's no mass party, fascist party rule. The Unity Party was a loose conservative coalition, not a revolutionary fascist movement. Uh, Resistance to full Nazification. Two, um, the Horthy blocked full Arrow-Cross rule until 1944 and hesitated on the Holocaust until Nazi occupation forced compliance. So the hand-wringing and quibbling, but he still ultimately complied. Um, in 1944, he tried to negotiate a separate peace with the Allies, leading to his overthrow by the Nazis. So the Horthy regime is more traditionalist than revolutionary. It's monarchist, Christian, aristocratic, not a fascist new order per se. And we have Viktor Orban, still a democratic, um, still democratic to some degree, but this is the electoral map from Hungarian parliament election of 2022. You notice Budapest here hanging strong and a couple of holdouts, but it's pretty much all solid KDNP, his party. He has the cult of personality and propaganda um, in line with the other fascist regimes. Hungry for Hungarians, rhetoric portraying migrants, especially Muslims and liberals, as existential threats. Um, uh, he's packing the courts with loyalists. Um, Media capture, over 80% of Hungarian media is now pro-government. Independent outlets are starved of ads and just run out. Um, let's see. Oh, he's very anti-LGBTQ. Um, he's taken action against content in schools and laws in courts. But there's not mass paramilitary violence. In a lot of the contemporary fascist adjacent regimes, we don't see a lot of that. It's just kind of a different time and a different culture, and we'll get into that a little bit later too. Um, no formal rejection of democracy, but through gerrymandering, media control, um, it's still not exactly democratic. Let's see. So, is it any surprise that Orban counts Trump among his closest allies? The two men have bonded over rejection of the WHO and Paris Climate Agreement, flirting with subverting democratic process through electoral autocracy, and favoring the Kremlin in the Russo-Ukrainian conflict in what has been a complete rug pull from the previous administration. If Orban is Hungary's Horthy and Trump is the Orban of the US, one could infer that Zekin might see Trump as an authoritarian, perhaps with some fascistic tendencies, but not truly a fascist. The U.S. Is the unified state capital apparatus, disciplining an uppity serfdom, unwilling to enthusiastically accept the gleanings of capital's harvest. But we must call it by its true name. To call this fascism amounts to erasure of our shared experience. We have been abused by this system, and our chance at taking our power back starts by calling it by what it is. Um, there's a couple of current authoritarian regimes with some fascist potential. You know, Bolsonaro is no longer in office, left in 22, and he's actually facing charges for his little insurrection stunt. Maybe we can learn a lesson from Brazil. They've kind of been taunting us over that in the media if you've been following. Um, but far-right authoritarian, not full fascism. Bolsonaro's regime had strong fascistic tendencies, militarism, violent rhetoric, and attacks on democracy, but lacked total state control and a mass fascist party structure. So I would instead of classical fascism, I would call it reactionary populist authoritarianism with fascist traits. But it was still constrained by Brazil's, checks and balances, kind of like ours. Um, these are the two side by side comparison. Obviously, it's a bit of a leap, but it kind of fits. Modi's India. This could be its own presentation in and of itself. Just hitting the high points here. Um, is closer to fascism, but with differences. He has a mass petty bourgeois base, um, anti-leftist repression against unions, communists, and Muslims who face state violence, like in Kashmir, for instance. Uh, he has a lot of corporate backing and support from the business community. Um, I would call it developing fascism. Um, it uses majoritarian nationalism to suppress dissent, but still operates within a weakening democratic framework. Protesters in Bangladesh protest Modi's anti-Muslim rhetoric. Why do we see these struggles as related parts of the same international struggle, LA 2025? Why am I talking about Modi here? It's all connected because capitalism pervades everything. Um, the Trump regime, I'm not telling you guys anything. You all see it, you all are experiencing it just like I am, but it's still not fascism. Um, I'd venture to say it's Bonapartism, but within our weird cultural framework. Um, Trotsky's analysis of fascism. Um, Fascism is a specific brand of Bonapartism and generally precedes a fascist regime. And in Europe, we had several fascist and proto-fascist regimes in close proximity with each other's nationalism, interfering with each other's, leading to clashes like Pétain in Vichy, France, and Germany, and the breakdown of the Italian-German relations toward the end of the war. Um, so, Bonapartism, there's a Trotsky quote that I want to share. Uh, by Bonapartism, we mean regime in which the economically dominant class, having the qualities necessary for democratic methods of government, finds itself compelled to tolerate in order to preserve its possessions, the uncontrolled command of military and police apparatus over it, or a crowned savior. This kind of situation is created in periods when the class contradictions have become particularly acute. The aim of Bonapartism is to prevent explosions. Bourgeois society has gone through such periods more than once, but these were, so to speak, only rehearsals. The present decline of capitalism not only has definitively undermined capitalism, but it's also has disclosed the total inadequacy of Bonapartism of the old type. In its place has come fascism. However, as a bridge between democracy and fascism in Russia, 1917, as a bridge between democracy and Bolshevism, there appears a personal regime that rises above democracy and lacks and tacks between the two camps, while safeguarding at the same time the interests of the ruling class. It is sufficient to give this definition for the term Bonapartism to be fully settled. Um, it seems to fit to me, but I'm curious to hear in the discussion what you all think. Here's kind of a side-by-side comparison. I'm not going to read to you guys, but you can see there's definitely some similarities, but there's also some key differences. I think these distinctions are why fascism is a ill-fitting label for Trumpism, combined with our different material conditions. We'll look briefly at the Franco regime, which Trotsky defined as Bonapartist, um, along with yeah. So its fascist characteristics is anti-communist. It seized power during instability with Nazi and Italian support following the Spanish Civil War. Rose to power amid a fractured left, uh, purging of ideological enemies during the White Terror, targeting minorities and sects, banning of Catalan and Basque languages, um, aligned with other fascist regimes, at least initially. But Catholicism is central to the movement, which is different. It lacked true mass support, like seen by Hitler or Mussolini. So it's more like clerical fascism. Is Trump a Bonapartist then? So key traits of a Bonapartist regime: charismatic populist leadership. I don't find him charismatic. Maybe you do, but claims to represent the people among against the elites, like drain the swamp. Authoritarian tendencies, weakens institutions, centralizes power, undermines checks and balances. Yeah. Um, Crisis-driven rise emerges during political instability, exploiting disillusionment. Uh-huh. Nationalist, militarist rhetoric glorifies national strength, often with militaristic overtones. Um, Uses AI to generate shirtless strongman pics of himself and post them on Twitter. Ambiguous ideology, pragmatic, not strictly left or right, blending policies for personal power. So Trump is a potential Bonapartist. Populist appeal. Trump's America First rhetoric pits real Americans against elites, media, and the deep state. Institutional erosion. Attacks on the judiciary, press, and electoral processes, e.g., 2020 election denial. Crisis exploitation rose amid economic anxiety, cultural backlash, and distrust in government. It's nationalistic symbolism. Its heavy use of patriotic imagery, militarized language dominate the streets. Um, Ideological flexibility. He was registered as a Democrat at one point, for freak's sake. Mixed conservative policies with economic populism, like tariffs and anti-free trade, and consolidating institutional control, like Project 2025, the big beautiful bill. Despite some pushback from the courts, he's undeniably seeking to consolidate institutional control through dismantling large swaths of the government and installing loyalists in every conceivable post. However, there hasn't been a coup or a permanent power grab, despite January 6th. U.S. institutions mostly held, but through restructuring the courts, he's setting up things up for one in the future, potentially. Also, whereas Napoleon engaged in state building through the Napoleonic Code, Trump is seeking state capture via Project 2025. Two sides of the same coin, though. With this context in mind, let's dive back into Zetkin and prepare for our discussion. I'm editorializing a bit here, laying out some parallels that I find see personally, and I'm curious to hear what y'all think in the ensuing discussion. Um, the failure of proletarian leadership. We have an undeniable failure of proletarian leadership and an obvious lack of any meaningful progress for the working class in this country. We have a DNC that pushed through NAFTA, which resulted in the loss of significant numbers of blue-collar jobs in the Midwest and the Rust Belt in particular, and drastically undermined bargaining power for the remaining domestic workforce by pitting Mexican workers against workers in the U.S. while stoking xenophobic tensions, followed by CAFTA and the TPP. The replacement of government assistance, the replacement of the AFTC with the TANF drastically reduced assistance for low-income households in need of government assistance. We had the crime bill of 94, which led to massive increases in incarceration due to draconian mandatory minimum sentencing requirements and other predatory measures. The repeal of the Glass-Steagall Act, which led to the 2000 financial crisis, which gutted the middle class. It's clear why the working class may have lost faith in the Democratic Party in this political environment. The DNC lost trust in the proletariat as the class that will remake society. This combined with the rise of neocons, it led to further exacerbated the divide between the rural working class and the urban majority of the population. The most recent few national elections have only served to further alienate the remaining adherents to the cult of reformism. The Bernie Bros, the dispossessed adherents of Democratic Socialist Bernie Sanders, were mocked, infantilized, attacked for stoking division within the party. Ultimately, what did they do in response? They went home. As Zetkin puts it, the betrayal by reformist leaders does not weigh so heavily in the attitude of these disillusioned forces as another fact, namely that the proletarian masses tolerate this betrayal, that they continue to accept the capitalist yoke without rebellion or resistance. Indeed, that they come to terms with a suffering even more bitter than before. Is the left in America repeating the same mistakes of the past? The bourgeoisie and fascism. The rise of a popular movement that transcends class stratification requires a tenuous alignment of the proletariat and bourgeoisie, despite their fundamental antagonism. This tenuous peace begins to unravel when the proletariat can no longer be pacified by neoliberalism, wrapped in a more palatable package, advertised with pop art promising hope, or a candidate that intersects enough identity markers that voters may forget that she's a cop with bad politics. At this phase, as Zetkin points out, the bourgeoisie reckons that the proletariat can now be subjugated and exploited only through force. Through increasingly cruel austerity measures combined with a militarized police force, we regularly endure rubber bullets and CS gas as a final futile attempt to control dissent in the streets, both sides knowing that it's only a matter of time before live rounds are deployed. There are discussions now of the Kent State Massacre, where unarmed protesters were murdered by National Guard on May 4th, 1970. But if you ask the average American what we commemorate on May the 4th, you'll either get a shrug or an enthusiastic, "May the 4th be with you!" for Star Wars Day. Now, as Zetkin writes, the state needs an extra legal and non-state instrument of force. While we don't have the true fascist mobs assembled yet, what the DHS has mobilized with poorly trained, loosely organized ICE patrols are starting to resemble this and could develop into the leaders these citizen mobs at some point. These goons straddle the line between state actor and pro bono mercenary, with their starting salary in the $25,000 range, only assuring that they can sleep indoors and maintain body weight in today's economy. It's evident that fascism has different characteristics in every country based on specific circumstances. Nonetheless, in every country, it has two essential features: a sham revolutionary program, which links up in extremely clever fashion with the moods, interests, and demands of broad social masses. The RNC accomplished this after trying to launch the Ron Paul Revolution and the Tea Party, and MAGA finally took. Uh, and the use of brutal and violent terror. See the shock troops in LA, the concentration camps being constructed with their cartoonishly evil accoutrement like moats filled with alligators. Um, Seeing a population of battle-hardened soldiers, um, factory workers and farmers turn to armed mob violence domestically is not such a departure from what their daily lives had been like during the era. How many Italians had drawn blood purposefully at this point in history? How many casualties had they witnessed personally? Violence was an integral part of society and an accepted tactic without the connotations that it carries today. In the contemporary US, do we even raise our voices? The fist fight between two kids on the playground equals expulsion. I would argue that these seemingly innocuous acts that would have amounted to bullying in 1920s Italy are much more dire within the confines of our social norms today. I'm inclined to give them much more weight than others have in evaluating whether we are approaching a fascist state. Contextualizing them within each era's social conditions is crucial. Trump has a multipolar power apparatus. By specifically focusing on wedge issues, especially immigration, Trump has been able to consolidate power among the most diverse sectors of the economy, the proletariat, along with the petty bourgeoisie. With a constant onslaught of propaganda and state-sponsored terror under the guise of standing up for the white working class, he's managed to bridge class divides between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, acting with cross purposes and unite them against a common enemy. In some ways, it was easier for Trump to undermine the labor movement since unions in the US are already strongly aligned with the Democratic platform and are largely a tool of controlled opposition rather than a tool of true bottom-up advocacy. If we needed a more clear indicator of the ideological shift of unions, we need only look at Teamsters President Sean O'Brien's speech at the 2024 RNC. The second cohort he's appealed to have been ultra-wealthy tech oligarchs. From their massive campaign contributions, manipulating the rhetoric on their platforms um, and publications, and policies tilted heavily in their favor, we can see why they've been his strongest allies from the beginning. At his inauguration, we see his server cabinet seated closely at his side alongside politicians, diplomats, and family members. To further deepen this alliance, he welcomed Elon Musk to head up an entire branch of the government tasked with paring away at the entire state bureaucracy and commissioned several of these tech bros as officers in our military. The second arm of this apparatus makes up part of the third. With the information economy becoming so integral to the consolidation of power, these oligarchs have become weapons in and of themselves. They have built the tools required to fight the battle of ideas, manufacturing consent for the third part of the apparatus, extreme consolidated state violence. Is history repeating itself? This is a Marx quote. Human beings make their own history, but they do not make it as they please. They do not make it under self-selected circumstances, but under circumstances existing already, given and transmitted from the past. The tradition of all dead generations weighs like a nightmare on the brains of the living. So is history going to repeat itself? From a few different perspectives, there are a few ways this could play out. There's the idea of reflexivity, where we see what happened in the past when we act a certain way, so we act a different way to change the outcome. An example would be like the 2008 financial crisis and the 1929 crash. Then there's the idea of contingency, wherein very similar historical circumstances don't necessarily bring about the same outcomes. There are underlying factors at play that are not accounted for. We're currently at a juncture in history that looks much like the early 20th century in Europe, but our material conditions are very different. We have technology thrown into the mix that dramatically alters our overall lifestyle. For instance, the level of surveillance available today is far beyond what was accessible to previous authoritarian regimes, but our access to information and venues for spreading propaganda are also much greater. So, who's to say if it all levels out? Having the bulk of our social interactions mediated by shadowy third party funded tech oligarchs can't be good for the long-term success of our revolution. Failing to understand the ways in which our cultural norms alter the way fascism could manifest in our era is a grave oversight. Confining the definitions to require mass physical vigilantism seems to be biased toward the era in which the original fascist regimes occurred. The average condition of the 19th and 20th century proles was far less abstracted from violence required to sustain our privileged lifestyles. Eating meat without butchery and enjoying peace without engaging in combat has created a culture of adults who have never taken a life to sustain their own, never had a fist fight to protect themselves, and never had to intervene to defend a neighbor. We have outsourced all of this violence domestically to our justice system, offshored the most extractive industrial violence to the global south, and self-soothed with synthetic violence through media and first-person shooters. Observe rather than act. This unnatural duality has reshaped the way we interact with just injustice. We are trained to observe and escalate, but escalate a complaint to the authorities when we see violence happening, even if it's being enacted by those authorities. Recreating our conditioned experience of violence, but holding our cell phone screens in between the violence and ourselves, watching this terror unfold in real time, we observe it through our screens, actively mediating it through the media to avoid accepting the fact that we have agency to intervene. Fascism this time will be much different, to such a degree as our society looks different. It will be passive aggressive, insidious, profitable, all encompassing, omnipotent, and stifling. Its systems are already bought and built. The beneficiaries are all on direct deposit, standing by. And if a few more things go just wrong, we will attempt to see through it and see only ourselves reflected back at us. Now, what are you going to do about it?